Everyone. We are moving from reading fiction to reading poetry. So I wanted to record a quick video on what that entails. And as I say, either love or loathe poetry. You rarely fall much in the middle. It might be something that grows on you. It might be something you secretly write and never share with anyone else. I do love it, but there are moments when I also loathe it. And hopefully, by going over some of these nuances of poetry, you'll be able to find some different ways to appreciate it. So, we don't read a ton of older poetry in this particular class. I tend to like more modern poetry, less structured poems. And I don't really care for all of the secret allusions to Greek mythology that I simply do not know. That might be your jam, and if so, that's very cool. But please know that when we read poetry, it is different as we are as individuals. It is not necessarily something that you have to solve like a Rubik's Cube. It is something that you are trying to kind of untie the laces to loosen the meaning and to try to relate it to something that might be relevant in your own life. It is distinct from other forms of writing, whereas in fiction, it is writing that is narrating an event. So there's a plot, there's characters, there's settings. Poems don't necessarily have all those things. We ask same or similar questions when we read poetry as we do with reading fiction and drama. And as I note here, you can't kill poems. The only way you can kill them is to not read them. So even if you find some that you struggle with or just simply don't like, maybe ask yourself the reasons behind those reactions. It is best listened to. And so I do try to link, when I can, some audio versions, but usually an audio version is pretty easy to find if you just Google the name of the poem and then audio. If you don't have that option, reading it aloud can be really helpful. And that way you can hear the cadence, you can hear, where the lines stop. A lot of times the poets themselves make particular choices as to where the lines end, and there is meant to be some sort of slight pause. I love poetry just like I love music in that it says so much in so little. We can have such a powerful impact by just a few words or stanzas on a page. Whereas fiction, it takes longer to unfold a story with its characters and setting and plot and conflict. A poem can just punch you in the gut in a matter of 8 lines. It is about experiences. It's not necessarily plot driven, but it's about maybe just a moment of enjoying a snowfall or dealing with grief or having a friend betray you. And it tries to snapshot those instances for us to relate to. It is often patterned. It doesn't have to be. I think traditionally when we think about poetry, we're thinking about the things that we read maybe as kids, the sing-songy, more rhymed nature of it. And it's true that there are definitely wonderful pieces of poetry that do follow those specific A, B, the same number of syllables in each line. A lot of the modern poets that we're reading, though, break those rules. And as I mentioned, the poets very much spend time thinking about how they're going to break their lines. And so if it's a short line and there's a break, they want you to kind of sit with it and linger with it. It's meant to be a bit of a emotional jolt, if you will. So start by reading it aloud. Listen to the cadence of it. That's the rhythm, the beat of it. Try altering the way that you say things just for different emphasis. And then again, think about how you respond to it. Is there something in it that sings to you, that repels you? Have it read to you, maybe by a professional author if you can find an audio version online, or use a text aid tool to do that. But I think one of the best parts of poetry is having it heard aloud. So we have a poem here by former poet laureate Billy Collins. If you look up any audio or video versions of Billy Collins, he's kind of a quirky little guy, rarely makes eye contact with his audience when he's reading, but kind of a dry sense of humor. But this poem is 4 lines, but I think it does a good job of explaining or describing what it feels like to go through a divorce. So once 2 spoons in bed, now tined forks across a granite table and the knives they have hired. So that idea of big spoon, little spoon, spooning with the person that you love, and instead of spoons that fit into each other, you become prickly, separate instruments. And you hire knives, which is a metaphor for lawyers, across a hard, cold table to fight it out. And, the idea of personifying cutlery as the people involved in a divorce process, and how cold and sad that can feel. So 4 lines, cutlery personified, divorce as the theme, and you leave with a feeling of it's going to be a long process and people are still going to end up hurt at the end of it. Another poem, Head, Heart, and again, notice that comma between the two. We are personifying the idea of making decisions with your head versus making decisions with your heart. If you're making them with your head, you're supposed to be logical, statistical, fact-driven. Whereas if you're making them with your heart, you are responding more to emotion. And the narrator of this poem goes through that fight. Heart weeps. Head tries to help heart. Head tells heart how it is again. You will lose the ones you love. They will all go. But even the earth will go someday. Heart feels better then, but the words of head do not remain long in the ears of heart. Heart is so new to this. I want them back, says heart. Head is all heart has. Help, head. Help, heart. Again, a simple poem, not a lot of lines on the page, but again, notice where the lines break. Notice the emphasis of like that 5th line, go, but, and how the comma at the very end, help, head, that's a direct call to the head, like help me, head. Help me help my heart. Help me make it make sense. Help me understand. Simple words, very few lines, but it, I think, captures what we go through when we grieve, when we lose. It's inconceivable when you've lost someone for the first couple days, couple weeks. Like, how can this person not be here anymore? And it's going to keep happening as long as we're humans on this earth and the earth is still around. We are going to lose people we love, and we're never going to get used to it. And this poem captures that pretty well. So as you listen for the first time, and maybe listen a few more times, start paying attention to diction. Diction is word choice, the choices the poet makes in the words that they use to convey the meaning of the poem. Again, just like they sit and ponder where to break the line, they spend a lot of time thinking of those words. Look for words that repeat. Look for images that change. Think about connotations, and connotations are feelings that we associate with objects, with colors. For instance, the color red evokes passion. It's often associated with Valentine's Day, with love, but it also connotes rage, intense emotion, the stop sign. So there can be dual meanings. The color green, envy, but also the color of verdancy, of life, of lushness. And so those choices have multiple layers of meaning. And then if you're unfamiliar with words that are being used in the poems, make sure that you're looking them up. I remember in grad school, we had to go through some John Donne poems, and we had to look in the Oxford English Dictionary at the translation and the evolution of words, and we had to write all of them out so that we could see how those words were developed and how they changed over centuries. It was a slog, but it was a really interesting project in just understanding how words change. We get new words every year. Some words fall away. So if a poem was written 100 years ago, it might be using language that we're not used to, that might have a slightly different meaning than it does now. So start noticing those things, and start maybe asking, does this still mean what it did when it was written? A lot of poetry is going to have figurative language, and figurative language is similes, metaphors, personification, irony, oxymorons, euphemisms, and they are often plentiful in songs. They're also plentiful in a lot of music, some good, some bad. They allow us to see things, to feel things. When you analyze a tangible to a non-tangible or an intangible to another intangible, it can make us understand something at a greater depth. Bad poetry, quote unquote, is going to either have absolutely no figurative language, or it's going to have tired and cliched language. So things that we have seen before a million times, we use it in our everyday vernacular. Poets strive for that fresh new way to see and experience something. So they're constantly recreating these pieces of figurative language. And for a while, because I'm a little bit of a nerd, I would keep a journal next to my bed when I read a book that had a particularly wonderful piece of figurative language in it. And I remember one that described a grandmother and the feeling of her cheeks, feeling like week old peaches, like that soft fuzziness and kind of the sagging skin. It was just a very visceral reaction I had to that, because I had a close relationship with my grandmother. I was scared of the dark. She would lay down next to me, and I remember stroking like her face and her upper arm, and that kind of soft but not completely firm flesh. That resonated with me. It's an image that's stuck in my mind. So pay attention to the symbolism, the figurative language that helps you see or feel things differently. In this, I'm not going to go through each of them, but similes use like or as, metaphors don't. They are a direct comparison. Personification gives human-like qualities to non-human things. We do this all the time in Disney films. And then allusion. Allusion is calling back to a previous something. So whether it's a speech or a law or another work of art. I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King uses 5 years ago, 7 years ago. It's calling back to somebody who was a well-known orator in history. And allusion is used in a lot of poems, especially poems that are a bit older. Then you're going to be looking for things like symbols. We look for a lot of symbols. We're kind of detectives in the literary world. We are looking for the clues. We are looking for the things that stand out to us. We will read a piece later called Trifles that is filled with symbols. But think about why objects are selected, what they're doing there, what they stand for. And I have some examples here of public symbols that we are associated with. So, we recognize our flag. We might recognize the flag of other countries. We recognize things when we're driving along the road, crosses. We know what those symbols stand for. And if they appear in poems, we kind of have an idea of what they're doing there. They can be historic, religious, personal. They can be cultural, but pay attention again to things that could be symbols for something else. So you have a couple subgenres of poetry. You have the poem that is narrative. Again, it is similar to fiction, where it has a plot and usually a narrator. Or you have what is known as a dramatic poem. It's dialogue between two people, and it can read like a play. So we will probably read some examples of all of those types. Poetry is often also musical. So there is the idea of the rhyme at the end of the word, brow and now. There's the alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of the word. So besiege thy brow is the b sound. We use alliteration and rhyme a lot in tales we tell to children because of the flowy, we like those sounds. We use it in music. It appeals to us in some way. There's something about it that like draws us in. We like that predictability. We like the expectation of the letter coming next. You also have the idea of rhythm. When you read something like a Shakespeare sonnet, there is a definite emphasis on a syllable. And that is, again, where you get that notion of iambic pentameter in most of Shakespeare's sonnets. They have so many syllables per line, and you have a bit of a kind of marching sense as you read it. And think about the effect that that kind of rhythm might have on you. As you read, avoid that notion that every poem has a noble truth that it's trying to tell you. It might just be about appreciating your garbage man. And it's not all beautiful. Some of the poems deal with really dark, really hard things. There's poems about the war, poems about lynching. They are ways that writers try to make sense of the world, try to draw attention to it. So it's not always going to be teaching us a lesson, and it's not always going to be beautiful. One of the textbooks I had from my undergraduate work was by these two authors, Perrin and Arp, and I liked this quote: "Poetry intensifies life. We find value in this intense living. To be intensely alive is the opposite of being dead. To be dull, to be bored, to be imperceptive is, in one sense, to be dead. Poetry comes to us bringing life and therefore pleasure. And to understand life is partly to be master of it." I do think it teaches us how to be more human, how to be more empathetic, how to find beauty in common things. I've been trying harder lately when I drive into work, and it's a short commute, but to, like, this morning, a bird flew over my car, not close, but I could see its wings, and I saw what's almost a full moon and kind of the pinkness of the sky because the sun hadn't quite come up yet, and trying to take those moments and put them in my brain to, like, this is a beautiful thing. These are beautiful moments. And again, it doesn't have to be beautiful. It can be tragic, but it is trying to emphasize a moment. So to recap, listen to the poems when you can, whether you read them or you have them read to you. Think about what you expect it to be about based solely on the title. Some poems, the title is just the first line of the poem. Sometimes it's poem number 4 or sonnet number 18. But if you can, try to make some guesses about what is going to be in the poem itself. Read the syntax literally. So what does it actually say? And a lot of times poems are frustrating because they are not the way that we speak. It is not in the same order. It's clipped language. It's kind of archaic or abstract. So try to understand it at a logical, conscious level, and then try to understand it more at a emotional level. And consult reference works. When we used to teach this with a big Norton anthology, we had the benefit of having footnotes and a lot of detail within the text itself. But in order to save all of us some money, we're using online text. But there are going to be online resources for a lot of these pieces because they've been around a long time. So if you read a piece and it's just like, I have no idea what this is about, do a little Googling, do a little searching. It can help you. There are plentiful videos on most of these works to help you understand them better. But I would encourage you to not just do that to begin with. Think about how you're responding to it. Each of you are individuals with different experiences, different beliefs, different goals, and the way a poem hits you where you are right now in life might be different. There are poems that I hated when I was a college student that I love now. And that's just because I've had years to live. I've had experiences that help me understand them more, and I come back and I appreciate them. There are things that I thought I loved, and I go back to them like, it doesn't do it for me anymore. And again, it's just kind of where you're at in life. Figure out who, what, when, where happens. Not all of them are going to be narrative. They're not going to be stories. They can just be snippets. Formulate tentative answers to the questions. Why does it matter, and what does it all mean? Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it doesn't matter, but possibly it does. Consider how the poem's form contributes to its effect and meaning. So how it's organized, how many lines, how many stanzas, how long. Sometimes poems can be shaped by the way that they look on a page. Pay attention to the rhyme, the rhythm, the alliteration, the meter, the how it's put together. And what gets lost when you translate the poem into modern prose. So this could be what is called like a paraphrase. If it's a very esoteric poem and you're just like, I have no idea, trying to just, okay, if I were to put this poem into words, what does it mean? Like Divorce by Billy Collins, those 4 lines is, to me, if I put it in like today's language, people start as lovers, they end as antagonists, and they fight over trivial things with lawyers involved. That is not going to capture the beauty and the intensity of that poem. But I'm trying to translate it into just easy to understand sentences. You can do a little bit of researching on the poet themselves. Oftentimes, things that have happened to that poet might appear. The place and time they were at in history and culture can be reflected in the poem. And then being able to argue about it, being able to discuss it or write about it. I have some forms linked in our folder about analyzing poetry and things to look for, and those might be helpful as you move on to thinking about the poems. So that's poetry. This PowerPoint will be available to you to review, and I hope you find something that you enjoy. Take care.